Our opening words are an excerpt from Carl Sagan's New York Times article, Growing Up with Science Fiction. The greatest human significance of science fiction may be as thought experiments, as attempts to minimize future shock, as contemplations of alternative destinies. This is part of the reason that science fiction has so wide an appeal among the young people. It is they who will live in the future. No society on Earth today is well adapted to the Earth of 100 or 200 years from now, if we are wise enough or lucky enough to survive that long. We desperately need an exploration of alternative futures, both experimental and conceptual. The stories of Eric Frank Russell were very much to this point. We were able to see conceivable alternative economic systems, or the great efficiency of a unified, passive resistance to an occupying power. In modern science fiction can also be found useful suggestions for making a revolution in an oppressive computerized society, as in Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. Such ideas, when encountered young, can influence adult behavior. Many scientists deeply involved in the exploration of the solar system, myself among them, were first turned in that direction by science fiction. And the fact that some of that science fiction was not of the highest quality is irrelevant. 10-year-olds do not read the scientific literature. In all the history of the world, there has never before been a period in which so many significant changes have occurred in so short a span of time. Accommodation to change, the thoughtful pursuit of alternative futures, is the key to the survival of civilization and perhaps of humanity. Ours is also the time of the first generation that has grown up with science fiction. I know many young people who would, of course, be interested, but in no way astounded, were we to receive a message tomorrow from an extraterrestrial civilization. They have already accommodated to that future. I think it is not an exaggeration to say that, if we survive, science fiction will have made a vital contribution to the continuation and benign evolution of our civilization. Thank you.
We open this morning with a few, well, maybe more than a few, words from Ursula K. Le Guin, one of science fiction's most brilliant and beloved truth-tellers, and a self-professed liar. From the preface of The Left Hand of Darkness, she begins, "Science fiction is often described and even defined as extrapolative. The science fiction writer is supposed to take a trend or phenomena of the here and now and purify it, intensify it for dramatic effect, and extend it into the future. If this goes on, this is what will happen. A prediction is made, method and results are reassembled, those of a scientist who feeds large doses of purified and concentrated food additives to mice in order to predict what may happen to people who eat small quantities over a long period of time. The outcome almost inevitably seems to be cancer. So does the outcome of extrapolation. Strictly extrapolative works of science fiction generally arrive where the cube of Rome arrives, somewhere between the gradual extinction of human liberty and the total extinction of terrestrial life. This may explain why people who do not read science fiction describe it as escapist, or, when questioned further, admit that they do not read it because it is just so depressing. Almost anything carried to its logical extreme becomes depressing, if not carcinogenic. Unfortunately, though, extrapolation is an element of science fiction. It is It isn't the name of the game by any means. It is far too rationalist and simplistic to satisfy the imaginative mind. Whether the writer or the reader, variables are the spice of life. This book, The Left Hand of Darkness, is not extrapolative. If you like to read it that way, you can. A lot of other science fiction as thought experiment. Let's say, Mary Shelley, that a young doctor creates a human being in his laboratory. Let's say, Philip K. Dick, that the Allies lost the Second World War. Let's say this or that, and so on and so forth, and see what happens. In this story, so conceived, the moral complexity proper to the modern novel need not be sacrificed, nor is there any built-in dead end. Though the institution can move freely within the bonds only set by the terms of the experiment, which may be very large indeed. The purpose of a thought experiment, as the term used by Schrödinger and other physicists, is not to predict the future. Indeed, Schrödinger's most famous thought experiment goes to show that the future, at least on a quantum level, cannot be predicted, but can be described, the reality of the present world. Science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. Let me say that part again. Science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. Predictions are uttered by prophets, free of charge, by charlatans, who usually charge, and honored in their day than prophets, and by the futurologists, salaried. Predictions are the business of prophets, clairvoyants, and futurologists. It is not the business of novelists. The novelist's business is lying. The Weather Bureau will tell you what next Tuesday will be like, and the Rand Corporation will tell you what the 21st century will be like. I don't recommend you take turn from the science fiction writers for such information. It's none of their business. All they're really trying to tell you is what they're like, and what you're like, and what's going on, what the weather is now. Today, this moment, the rain, the sunlight, look, open your eyes, listen, listen. That is what the novelists say. But they don't tell you what they see or hear. All they can tell you is what they have seen or heard. And in their time in this world, a third spent of it asleep, a third dreaming, and another third spent telling lies. The truth against the world, yes, certainly fiction writers, at least in their braver moments, do desire to tell the truth, to know it, to speak it, to serve it. But they go about it in a particular and devious way, which consists of inventing persons, places, and events which never did happen, never will exist or occur, and by telling these fictions in such vivid detail and at length, with such emotion that when you're done putting down this pack of lies, there you say, yes, there it is. That is the truth. Is it any wonder that any truly respectable society has never trusted its artists? But our society, being troubled and bewildered, seeking guidance, sometimes puts entirely too much trust in its artists, using them as prophets and futurologists. I do not say that artists cannot be seers, could not be inspired, that the Awen could not take upon them and the gods speak through them, but what would an artist be if they did not believe that to be happening? Nor would I say that the artist is alone in being so burdened or so privileged. The scientist is another who prepares, who makes ready, working day and night, sleeping and awake for inspiration. As Pythagoras knew, the god may speak in forms of geometry as well as the shape of dreams, in the harmony of pure thought and in the harmony of sounds, in numbers as well as words. But it is words that make trouble and confusion. We are asked now to consider the words as useful only in one way, as signs. Our philosophers, some of them, would have us agree that a word, sentence, statement, only has value insofar as one single meaning points to one fact of comprehensible and rational intellect, logically sound and ideally quantifiable. I'll finish off this reading with my favorite part of the preface. I talk about gods, I am an atheist, but I am an artist too. Therefore, a liar. Distrust everything I say. I am telling the truth. She goes on to say a bit more. I'll leave that for you to read. The book itself, which I will touch on a little bit later, is one that is really interesting to explore. I wanted to open up with this kind of perfect window into what we're here to explore today. That science fiction is not a prediction of the future, but a description of the present. That it is not extrapolative, but a metaphor. And that line, science fiction is not predictive, it is descriptive. It sits with me like scripture. Because it reframes the entire genre. It tells us that these stories are not blueprints of what will happen. They are a way of understanding what is happening here and now. Beneath the surface, between the cracks, beyond what is quantifiable, they are mirrors, they are moral riddles, they are myths dressed in lab coats. As Le Guin said, all fiction is lie that tells the truth. But science fiction in particular tells a kind of truth that we don't yet have the words to name, which would make you believe as a kind of spiritual practice. As Le Guin said, okay, so you see, where religion gives us parable and ritual, science fiction gives us experiment and metaphor. Where theology gives us what we believe about the nature of the universe, and the science fiction challenges us to ask what the universe we build for ourselves and others will look like. Looking all the way back at the beginning of the genre, with Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus, which is its full title, often considered the first true work of science fiction. That full title hints at its deeper structure, not merely as a retelling of an ancient myth, but as a meditation on ambition, creation, loneliness, and the ethical boundaries of knowledge. Mary Shelley doesn't warn us about a future and the powers of science to bring back the dead. She asks what happens to us, to our creations, when we make something in our own image and reject it. Returning to The Left Hand of Darkness, yes, it's about a genderless society, exploring themes of identity, society, gender roles, self-expression, but it's also about trust, about vulnerability, about seeing someone as fully human, even and especially when they are not like you. It is about the sacred work of unlearning fear. These aren't just speculative stories. They are thought experiments in empathy. They are a training ground for the soul. We opened with Carl Sagan's own reflection on science fiction, especially as a powerful tool for the young mind, because it trains imagination and alertness to alternatives. It offers the possibility of surprise. To be a reader of science fiction is to give, in the words of Tiago Forte, a disrespect for the merely possible. As Le Guin might describe him, that is the business of futurologists, not novelists. But if we do extrapolate from what is, to the extent that our current lines of injustice, ecological collapse, and despair for the future, then we only arrive at dystopia. That is not prophecy. That is just surrender. Science fiction is what happens when we refuse to surrender. It is what happens when artists and dreamers and scientists and people of faith sit down together and say, let's imagine something else. Let's ask, what if? But you may be asking, Part of that brain screaming, what do we do when we look so clearly at the present and it is all just so painful? When the future extrapolation of what if looks only like more suffering. The whole genre of dystopia is that. The particular popularity of science fiction stories built around dystopias, broken worlds, collapsing systems, fractured societies, speaks to this chronic, consistent pain. However, even these stories are not just to entertain our cynicism. They are here to trouble our conscience. They do not have to be read as instructions for despair. They can be invitations to wake up. Neil Nimitz, in her reflections on climate change, said that we do not need perfect utopias or hopeless dystopias. What we need are topias. Futures wherein there is still injustice, still conflict, still complexity, but there are people still trying, struggling, choosing for better. That is where we live. That's what we can build, and science fiction can help show us how. Let's look at, say, Foundation by Isaac Asimov. The story begins with the fall of a vast galactic empire, not in a singular event, but through the slow erosion of trust, reason, and truth. A mathematician named Harry Seldon develops a theory of psychohistory that can predict the behavior of civilizations. He knows his civilization is doomed. He cannot stop the fall, but he can shorten the time spent in the darkness. So he establishes a secret society of scientists, scholars, a vast library, the Foundation, to preserve knowledge with the goal of rebuilding civilization over 1,000 years instead of 30,000 years. It's an audacious hope, but it's not a naive one. It requires sacrifice, delay, faith in institutions, education, and a belief that reason can still matter even and especially in the darkness. Then there's Star Trek, which gives us one of the most enduring, optimistic looks at future. A humanity, in the words of Jean-Luc Picard, that has outgrown its infancy, survived its worst impulses, eliminated poverty and environmental collapse, and emerged from these catastrophes determined to explore, to learn, and to understand. But even in Star Trek, conflict still arises. The Federation's lofty ideals are tested. Sometimes they fail. But the point isn't perfection. Decades of storytelling across centuries of fiction have brought many interpretations of what that particular future might be, though they all remain aspirational. The tonal spectrum, we have Star Wars, a story not about progress, but about resistance, about the necessity of rebellion. It gives us, yes, empires and Death Stars, the Force, lightsabers, and the smugglers who learn to care, princesses who become generals, and outcasts who become heroes. Through it all, in the face of overwhelming darkness, there is one continual whisper. Rebellions are built on hope. And then there is Blade Runner, The Whispers, a film that whispers rather than shouts, and a book that I confess I have not been able to read. I'm sorry, Philip K. Dick. But in its visual medium, it is one of the most iconic and philosophically haunting visions of the future. It's set in a broken, neon-lit corporate world of control and environmental decay. It sees artificial humans, the replicants, as genetically engineered androids built for labor, hunted for trying to live past their expiration date. The film's question isn't who's real or who's artificial. It's who chooses to care, who remembers, who mourns. It's not a story about androids and detectives. It's a story about empathy. These stories all remind us that dystopia, utopia, it isn't about the setting, it's about the choices, about the systems we serve, and about what we value. What are you willing to resist? What future do you want to have? Because the danger isn't that we all suddenly wake up in dystopia. The danger is that we get used to living in one. So, we return to the power of science fiction, not as predictor of our ruin, but as a jolt for us into responsibility. A reminder that another future is possible, but only if we dare to imagine it, and only if we are willing to struggle for it. The struggle is not glamorous. It is not guaranteed, but it is holy work. It is what we are called to do. Hope is not the same thing as optimism. Optimism expects that things will work out. Hope insists on showing up even when we don't know if it will. It's the discipline of imagining a better future and acting, however imperfectly, in service of that future. Octavia E. Butler, visionary author and deep observer of humanity, understood this. In the parable of the sower, she gives us earthseed, a theology not on promises but of change. God is change, her protagonists write. Shaping God means shaping our world, and it takes work. It takes a lot of work, and it takes intention. Butler's characters do not survive because they are chosen ones, but because they are adaptable, empathetic, and determined. They build communities, resist cruelty. They imagine something better, even when that seems impossibly far away. This is the spiritual core of really good science fiction. It doesn't offer us answers, it makes us question. It doesn't prescribe action, it invites action. Science fiction gives us a practice space for this kind of radical hope. It gives us stories where survival isn't just about the technology, but it's about trust, about community, and all about that imagination. In Arrival, film from 2016, slight spoilers for a 9-year-old movie, the characters do not save the world with weapons, but with words. They save it through understanding language, through the slow and painful work of understanding each other. Louise, the linguist, learns an alien language so deeply that it changes the way she experiences time. She sees her life, her grief, her future heartbreak, and chooses to live anyways. That too is hope, choosing to love, knowing it will hurt, choosing to speak, knowing you will not be understood. And when there is, on the other side, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which takes a very different tone, but underneath the absurdity, the satire, and the cosmic, comic bureaucracy, there is a simple reminder. Don't panic, carry a towel, ask questions, keep going. It's a different kind of hope, but no less real. The kind of resistance that laughs in the face of the end of the universe, adapts, and keeps the ship flying anyways. This is where we come back to our own faith. Unitarian Universalism does not offer a fixed creed. It does not offer a single prophesized final answer. It offers a commitment to keep asking, to keep caring, to keep showing up, even and especially when it is hard to do all of those things. Our values, justice, equity, compassion, the free and responsible truth for meaning, these aren't easy. They demand action. They demand courage. And most radically, they demand imagination. So, what does that mean for us here and now? It means that hope is something we have to choose to practice. It is not something we have, it is something we have to do. In a world that often demands our despair, practicing hope is a kind of rebellion. Choosing to build community is resistance. Choosing to fight for justice is radical. Choosing to believe that change is possible even when we won't see the fruits of our labor, that is a sacred act. Science fiction gives us a sacred language for this hope. These stories aren't just modern parables or the basis of fandoms, discussion posts, and online arguments, although it is all of that. They're not meant to be prophecies. They are just entertainment, after all. But they do provoke us. They remind us that we are still writing our future, even though the ink is not yet dry. So, science fiction as spiritual thought experiments. We are asked, what kind of future are we building? What kind of people are we becoming? What kind of world do we dare believe is possible when hope is practiced? Not as comfort, but as active resistance, as clarity, as refusal to let fear and despair have the final word.
And for our closing words today, we will go back to Octavia E. Butler. A few rules for predicting the future. The one thing that I and my main characters never do when contemplating the future is give up hope.